Hello there. I want to talk a little bit about something called blade flex when honing a straight razor. And this is important to understand when honing a straight razor, and it's something that is not mentioned a whole lot. There are a few cautionary kind of things you'll see every now and then from somebody, but they don't really get into it enough. I think a lot of times newbies don't realize how easy it is for the blade of a straight razor to flex. Now, this is a hollow blade, hollow ground, so it will flex a lot more than, say, a wedge, okay? But it doesn't matter. Even a full wedge straight razor, the edge will flex. And in a lot of times, or a lot of instances, the blade also will flex. Uh, I have honed straight razors that the grind was so absolutely thin that I could take and push on the blade and watch it move. Okay. Uh, but it doesn't matter whether we're talking about a full hollow blade or a wedge. They will flex if you put pressure on them, the right kind or the right amount of pressure. Now, this is important because pressure is used sometimes on straight razor honing, particularly if you're setting a bevel, or if you're a lot of times, and I know a lot of people will say, oh, don't do that, but it absolutely helps on Arkansas stones. If I am honing with an Arkansas stone, say I went from an India oil stone and I went to an Arkansas soft, or I went from a soft to a hard, or whatever. If I want that stone to cut a little bit better, I might use a bit of pressure, or I might use a bit of torque toward the edge to get the thing to hone a little bit faster. Now, when I move to something like a finishing stone, a surgical black, or a translucent, or a true hard, something like that, then I want to use no pressure, in my opinion. I know there might be a few guys that are successful at using pressure, but in my opinion and in my experience, when you end up in the finishing stages of a straight razor hone, the worst thing you can do is put pressure on the edge of a blade. All that work that you did in the lower grits, uh, half of that's going to go away if you use pressure on that finishing stone. That's my experience. So you have to understand, pressure can be your friend, particularly when you're setting a bevel. Particularly if you're setting a bevel on, like I do a lot of restores. I used to. I haven't been blessed enough to find any razors that I can restore lately. In the last 6 or 8 months, probably, my area has gone dry, and so I don't have any more blades I can restore. If I find them, I'll definitely get them because I enjoy doing the work. But the point is that I have restored quite a few blades. And when you restore a blade, a lot of times the bevel is completely gone by the time you get done with the restoration, and you have to completely reset the bevel. You have to actually grind a new bevel in. You're not just resetting the bevel, you're actually regrinding that thing. So in instances like that, a bit of pressure is your friend. Same thing with torque. If you are trying to set a bevel on a razor, if you want to speed that process up, you can add a little bit of torque. But the key word here is a little bit. In the straight razor world, in honing straight razors, a little bit is a whole lot. Okay? When you hear guys that are experienced with honing and the guy, oh, I'm using a lot of pressure. Well, to him, relative to his understanding of the way that a blade will flex, and his knowledge that he knows that there's a point I can't go beyond, or that edge is going to flex, and it depends on how much steel is in that blade, by the way. To him, it might be heavy pressure. To you, it might be light pressure. If you don't hone a lot, or you haven't honed a lot, if you're a beginner, or you're inexperienced at using pressure, you don't understand how easy it is to flex that edge. If you're grinding really hard down on a stone with a straight razor, trying to set a bevel, and you're grinding snot out of it, that's too much. You have to understand, if the blade flexes, if you set that bevel with a bunch of pressure and it flexes, what you basically have done is change the shape of that bevel. It's not flat anymore. It's got a flex in it. Now, you can get in trouble on, especially on natural stones, using pressure in that way, because the blade flexes. If the stone is less than the width of the length of this blade, then what you're doing is the stone is here, and you got some of the razor hanging off that end, or some of it hanging off here. You put a bunch of pressure there, what you're going to end up with is a nice, beautiful looking frown in your razor's edge, in your bevel. Too much pressure. But even if you don't get that, what can happen is if you put a ton of pressure, too much pressure, where the blade flexes, it changes the shape of that blade as it goes across the stone. So you might get a fantastic bevel set. I mean, it might pass every single test you give it. It might be just wicked sharp on a bevel set. But then when you start going through the mid-range, and then you get to your higher grit stones that you're going to finish on, and you relax that pressure, because in my experience, if you go to finish and you put a bunch of pressure on it, you can trash your edge and you've wasted your time. So when you start taking light passes on a finished stone, that blade is not, the edge of that blade is not the same shape that it was when you were exerting all that pressure. And so you don't get a complete polish on that bevel. And then you put that thing up to your face and you go, I can't understand why the razor's not shaving well. Well, it's not shaving well because you changed the shape of that edge with all that pressure, and then you went to try to hone it finish it without pressure, and you're in a pickle. So, I mean, a little bit of pressure is a whole lot of pressure. A little bit of torque is a whole lot of torque. You don't need very much at all. You need to always be conscious of the fact that this blade, or this blade, don't matter which one we're talking about, that's a near wedge, that's going to flex. It will. So this will flex a heck of a lot more than that, but this will flex. You have to take that into account and understand this is not static. Just because it's made out of steel don't mean it's stiff and it's not going to move on you. It's not going to flex. Steel flexes. So you need to remember that. And just like how you had to learn all the different honing strokes, how you had to learn how to keep the blade on the stone all the way through, just like you had to learn the proper way to strop, just like you had to learn the right kind of angle to put the blade up against your face when you're shaving, and how to adjust it when you're doing against the grain, or when you're coming from different areas of your face and stuff, you have to learn what the proper pressure and the proper torque is. So a little is an awful lot. And that's something that I think needs to be said. I hope that that I explained it well enough for you to understand. But you need to be conscious of the fact that steel will flex. And your straights will flex. And if you want to improve in your honing, you have to take that into account when you start doing things like putting pressure on the edge of a straight razor, or on the blade of a straight razor on a stone trying to set a bevel, or when you start trying to use torque and that kind of thing. It's a tiny, tiny, tiny difference between what someone would consider no pressure and what they would consider a lot of pressure on a straight razor, and still not causing the blade to flex. Because that's the point. If someone tells you they're using a lot of pressure on a blade, and it's somebody you trust and somebody that you believe knows what they're talking about and stuff like that, you have to understand that that person is talking about, he or she is using a lot of pressure relative to the thickness of the grind, relative to the flex that blade is going to give him or her. They're not going to use so much pressure that it actually flexes that blade, because they know and understand it. That's bad. It's bad. So, all right. I hope that helped you. God bless you. I'll talk to you later.